Thanks everyone for attending DICE this year and for attending this panel. Yeah, so secret sauce, disruption on the mobile frontier. I know it sounds a little bit pretentious, but that was intentional. Let me first introduce myself briefly and explain why I'm even sitting here or have the authority to do this. In 2006, I got a new job at a small casual game company in Seattle, and as sort of a hazing ritual, they gave me the mobile games as to start out with, and I had about 5 of these things, and some of them were on what they called feature phones at the time, and mobile wasn't cool within the company really, but what was interesting was that it was actually making money and contributing meaningful value to the bottom line. And I think everybody in the studio wanted to work on the cool new stuff, but I was pretty happy working on the mobile products because they were actually making money. Then I got promoted to be the click wheel iPod game guy. And that was so awful, and I can't even talk about it, not because I signed some deal with Apple or agreement with Apple, but because it makes me physically sick to talk about like recreating physics with fixed point math. That really sucked.
And Zuma was all right, I remember.
And Peggle was awful. When we first got it running, it was like the pegs were square, so it just. And then, but that made me the Apple guy, and so suddenly this thing was coming down the road, and we all got iPhones. We were like, wow, this would be cool for gaming. And I got to work on our first App Store launch day title. And we also put into that game, we put in the Facebook iOS cross-platform leaderboards, which was, I don't know if it was first, but it was definitely something that felt innovative to me. And so suddenly, mobile wasn't this joke in the studio. It was something, it was a place where we were innovating and actually doing really important work. So that game stayed in the top 10 for 2 years. And today, mobile really defines like a lot of things that are persistent throughout all platforms, like always-on connectivity, and in-game monetization, and free-to-play. And so, now mobile's really important. Now, there are obviously new ways to acquire, pay for, and play games, and mobile is really driving this. But another important thing is that the users are really driving the way that these things happen, and that is also kind of new and something that mobile is bringing to the table. It's the indies that are also rewriting the rules, and when the Academy greenlit this panel, these guys were at the top of my list, so it's really great that they agreed to do this because my list wasn't that long. So they all have very different approaches to things like monetization, design, culture, hairstyle. But the one thing that they all have in common is that games come first. So let me introduce them. Let's see. On the far end there, this man bootstrapped his studio. There were no VCs, no publishers. Just a savings account, and they were doing consulting work on the side. They had no marketing spend. They've spent no money on marketing, and in 3 years they've released 10 games, 5 of them bona fide hits, reaching an audience of millions of people. The original Steambirds broke 13 million people on the web alone. None of their games were developed by a team of more than 2 engineers. In fact, most were done by 1.5 engineers. And I don't know where you find half an engineer, Dave, but that's cool. And he is the only biz guy in the company, so he gets to do this. Please give a round of applause to David Edery from Spry Fox. And in the center, this gentleman started out in 2001 doing contract work on licensed GBA titles in lovely Brisbane, Australia. Somehow stayed in business by spending 2009 apparently releasing games on the Xbox Live Indie Games portal. I don't know how you did that. Basically coming up with the ideal mechanic for both touch and motion control interfaces, which were both the new hotness at the time with Fruit Ninja, which we all know and love. Has remained fiercely independent in both business and sort of defining studio culture, and is responsible for the slaughter of over 2 billion innocent virtual fruit. Please welcome Phil Larsen from Halfbrick.
Thank you. Did you say 2 billion?
Yeah.
2 trillion.
Sorry.
Wow.
It's
Sorry,
just a couple zeros.
I spent ages figuring out that number the other day. I just wanted to make sure we got it right.
And last but not least, this man founded founded Backflip with 2 other guys and $150,000 in gaming mecca, Boulder, Colorado. Became hugely famous by releasing a game where you toss crumpled paper into a trash can. Shot through the App Store stratosphere with DragonVale, a freemium breeding sim game that actually respected the players and was a colossal success because of that and many other great things. Had the #1 top grossing iPad game, the #4 top grossing iPhone game in 2012, and contrary to popular belief, does not hate all ragdolls. Julian Farrior. So let's jump right in. I'd like to start by you guys telling the audience about how you look for existing games that have substantial user bases, you buy them, you take those users, and then you ram them through your network of crappy freemium games, monetizing them into poverty, one worthless virtual item at a time, and that's how you succeed, right?
Exactly.
Great.
Totally.
Next.
Awesome.
No, seriously, it seems like user acquisition is this big term that's being thrown around by a lot of people these days. And you know, it seems to me like at least the old way we used to talk about it was we would acquire users by making great games, and they would come naturally. Obviously, there are challenges in the marketplace that make this more complicated now. Can you guys talk to specifically what you do and where you ride the line between what's being called user acquisition now and what you've done to build your studios to this point?
Yeah. So I think this panel specifically cares very much about the games they make, whether it be an ultra-casual game or whether it be a slightly deeper one. So I think the tack, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but it's slightly different than the market as a whole. So from our standpoint, we built up sort of a mass ultra-casual user base with games like Paper Toss, games like Ninjump, games like Strike Night. We had a huge amount of engagement, now north of sort of 5 million users a day. And with that large engagement, we were able to effectively cross-promote higher yield product, be it an Army of Darkness Defense, be it DragonVale, or be it a game like Ragdoll Blaster 3. So to that end, what you first explained, which is focusing on really good products to build engagement, is still sort of a philosophy that we very much hold dear. So, and what we find, or what at least I find, is that when I go out and I acquire a user through my own casual product, that user is much more likely to stay in the Backflip family, to play 5 or 6 or 7 games and really sort of live across multiple products, as opposed to a few tests we've done with really going out and buying a user, and the churn rate for that user and the fall off is extraordinarily high. So,
yeah, Julian's exactly right, and you know, we were able to identify you know, the type of game, the scope of the game, the features, the controls at the right time, you know, in a game like Fruit Ninja. And obviously, the market in mobile changes like so rapidly. We were advantageous in that, you know, we were there at the right time with the right product, and that enabled us to build our user base. And then in a sense, yeah, we have done user acquisition, but only through our own network. The problem that I think a lot of people are having now is you know, I was at a conference and someone coming up to me and said, oh, you know, how much do you spend on, you know, user acquisition? And by that, I assume they're talking about, hey, you know, churning through users, paying whatever it is to buy one these days. And I said, well, none, we haven't done anything. And they said, oh, so you don't do any marketing then? It's like, oh, man. So, so the mistake is that I think a lot of guys who are trying to get into the industry are blinded to that. Think, oh well, you know, these guys, you know, they just, you know, acquired users. You know, they weren't. It's not that they weren't built on a great product, but that is almost not a secondary concern, but it's like way lower on their priority list. And if you don't have that product in the market that supports it at the right time, you know, you're going to be churning and wasting money.
So our attitude has generally been, we want to try to make the most original and unusual product that we can. And then once we've done, and obviously it can't just be original and unusual, it actually has to be fun. But once you've got that, then the idea is, let's leverage our relationships with people like the folks at Apple, the folks at Google, the folks at Amazon, et cetera, get them to hopefully feature the game, which thankfully, historically, they've been willing to do, again, because we're bringing them something that they don't see every day. That gets the game in front of a reasonably large population, and then from there we're hoping for word of mouth and the viral hooks in the game and everything else to spread it. We're relatively new to, compared to these guys, we're relatively new to the mobile space. We started in the web, and to some extent that's still our home. And there's no question that what we found is that no matter how good your game is, it is certainly non-trivial to get a large population, particularly in the mobile space, without doing any sort of paid user acquisition. But the numbers speak for themselves. Tripletown, certainly not compared to a game like Fruit Ninja, but Tripletown has been a reasonably good success. We've got something like 9 million downloads of it, something like that in mobile in total. And we haven't spent a dime in marketing, and that's primarily because Google featured it 3 or 4 times and made it an editor's choice. Apple featured it 3 times, and now, even though it's not being featured, we'll be following it on Twitter, and you're just constantly seeing people tweet about it to their friends. And so we have actually a reasonably, we're still not spending anything to acquire users for Tripletown, but we're making almost as much per day as we were 6 months ago, because people are telling their friends about it. And what's particularly interesting about that is that Tripletown is possibly one of the crappiest social games ever. It really doesn't have a lot in the way of viral hooks, particularly in the mobile version. The mobile version is essentially just a single-player game. But it's spreading anyway because it's different, and people like it, and they spend a lot of time playing it. So we tend to focus on that. Our attitude is we're going to make a game and that we assume is going to be appealing to, at very least, a niche audience that will be passionate about it. And a niche audience in the mobile space, given how many hundreds and hundreds of millions of people have smartphones at this point, a niche audience may actually not be all that niche, right? It may actually be pretty big. And so we feel like as long as we've identified a small but passionate following, that passionate following will get out there and spread the word about our games. And so far, thankfully, that's been the way it's worked out.
So when you guys, I'm sure you've heard about this too, but I just recently heard somebody kind of rambled off a figure to me. They're like, yeah, a high quality user costs like $8 now. Coming from a place where you guys sort of organically built your audience, does that kind of thinking even enter into your process? Do you sit there and run a model for how many users you can buy for an X amount of dollars to inject them into your system and into your network, or are you doing any of that?
I think it's about taking it all in and understanding what's going on, so that in the event that you do decide, okay, for this particular game, maybe spending $8 per user is going to be a good thing, and it's going to work. In that case, you're relying on the data, and the data can often be wrong because it just won't work out the way you think it will.
So
because there's that X factor. Yeah. Am I going to tell Dave about this game I downloaded last night? I might not. If I remember it, the $8 they spent to acquire me isn't going to necessarily translate to that. So I guess what we did with Fruit Ninja at the time is we did everything we could possibly think of, to eliminate luck out of the equation. Right. In terms of building the right product, marketing the right way and releasing at the right time. We did everything we possibly could, and we got over the line with that, and we did it right. But you need to, and today you still need to do the exact same thing. So if acquiring a user for money, you think that's going to be worth it, and you're really sure, it can't be the only thing you do, but yeah, you can give it a try.
So we very much look at data. I think we take a combined approach. My first goal as a company was to build a company that could build great product. And we spent 2 years trying to do that or get to that point, hire the right people, make really, really great product. And at that point, I brought a handful of folks in who could view things through a more analytical lens. So I spent 8 years at Yahoo. I brought a very sort of quantitative marketing person to run my marketing. He does less around user acquisition, but a lot around sort of analyzing the behavior of our users within our games. So let me give you a great example. So in the early days of DragonVale, we saw that people were falling out of the tutorial at a very steep drop-off. So I was losing, roughly 60% of my users after the 5th level. So we were able to look at that, completely re-architect it, such that we didn't see significant fall-off till maybe 11, 17. So that kind of analysis is very, very important, but it doesn't mean anything if you haven't created a really fun core gaming experience that you know, can really retain users. And I think that's what we're seeing. I think, you know, I mean, look, you could look at DragonVale as just another collecting game, but what we did is we looked out there and what we saw was a sea of mediocrity in mobile. The characters just weren't compelling. So when I listened to, you know, JJ or Gabe or Glenn or any of these guys talk about what they're thinking about it, I do the same thing, but in a much more sort of simplistic fashion, right? So for me, I wanted to build meaningful characters that people wanted to collect into a game or a genre, and I just happened to intersect with a couple ex-Insomniac guys, one of which wanted to move out to Colorado, and it was just incredibly fortuitous. Ratchet & Clank was one of my favorite games, and suddenly I had an art team that could build compelling characters that people would be attached to and would sort of resonate with.
Okay.
I do want to say something at this topic. I don't think, so we actually are looking pretty hard at paid user acquisition, even though we haven't historically done it, partially just because, quite frankly, Tripletown doesn't have the metrics necessary to support the user acquisition is really expensive in mobile, and the price seems to keep going up every day. But so we are looking at it, and with some of the games that were coming out now, they'll hopefully have a high enough ARPU and retention that we'll be able to do paid user acquisition. And I don't think you can ignore it, quite frankly, because I mean, if you look at the top grossing games and the top paid games and the top free games, the vast majority of them at this point are games that have substantial user acquisition budgets behind them and substantial cross-promotion behind them. So I think if you're like us and you're relatively new to the market, or for that matter, even just in general, you can't really ignore that stuff. But where I hope we're different is that we recognize that that's an arms race, and I don't want to be in an arms race. That's never fun, being in an arms race. People are going to if you're just making the 10th clone of some really popular free-to-play game or the 100th clone of some really popular free-to-play game on mobile, then the only way you're going to beat those guys is if you're spending a little bit more on user acquisition, or a little bit more efficient user acquisition, you're spending a little bit more time figuring out how to squeeze every last penny out of your customers. I don't want to do, like, that's not what gets me out of bed in the morning, right? That's not why I want to be doing what I'm doing. So instead what we do is we make something that is pretty unusual, and then hopefully we don't have to be in that arms race, right? We can acquire our users, and we can, you know, at our own pace and at a rate that we feel comfortable given the metrics of our game. And again, then because of the natural virality of the game and because of word of mouth and because of the support we get from our partners, it might actually go out there. But at the end of the day, I can't ignore the fact that the odds of me getting a game into the top 20 on any of the charts in any of these major mobile platforms is very, very near zero if I don't do paid user acquisition. That's life today. I think, you know, for whatever it's worth, I think that the major mobile platforms could probably do something about that if they really wanted to. I shouldn't even say probably. They could definitely if they wanted to, right? I mean, they control the charts. If they wanted to, they could change the way things work such that, no, this game, because it has the high, you know, seems to have the highest user ratings and we personally like it and a few other factors, is going to be the thing that shows up in the top 10. And they could do that, right? They've chosen not to do that. I'm sure they have their reasons. So as long as things are the way they are today, and it's clear that most of the things in the top of the chart have spent a fairly large sum of money to get there, you have to be aware of that and you have to be willing to play that game. But I hope more developers in this industry will choose to play that game by making something different as opposed to simply, again, making the 100th version of some other popular game.
I think you bring up a really good point there, because I think there's several different approaches. So, you know, if you look at some of the very top, it feels like there's a high user churn in those games. So I imagine that you make a lot of money for a finite, short duration amount of time. Our approach, at least with one title, was to try to make a smaller amount of money over a much, much broader user base. And at least for us, that's allowed us to have a game in the top grossing for 18 months, in large part because we try not to exhaust our users. Now it's a very fine line, right? We just had sort of this big bring all the content back sale over the holidays, and we felt that we were really sort of pushing that limit. And as a result, we've sort of stepped off the gas for the next month or so to try to give people time to breathe and do other things within the game and hopefully sort of, stick with us. So I look at LTV, which I think is probably higher than some of those high churn games if I look at the lifetime value of that user, albeit in much, much smaller increments along the way. And you're not forced to back them into a corner to spend money. You don't put up these crazy paywalls. You treat them better, and you hope that pays off.
So I'm really glad you said that. Sorry, very last comment. My business partner Daniel likes to say we're not making games, we're making hobbies. And what he means by that is I want to make a game that someone will play for the next 10 years. It's like golf. It's like playing soccer. It's just the thing that they like to do. And when you have that kind of, obviously that's a lofty ambition, and we're a young company, so we'll see if we do that. But I'm not taking anything for granted. I'm not going to assume that we're going to pull it off. But so far, that seems to be the way it is with Tripletown, for example. I mean, I got lots of people who've been playing it for 2 years straight every night before bedtime. And when you have that kind of attitude about the game development you do, you can worry a little bit less about, oh, did I make a crap ton of money in the first 30 days, which is what it seems like the vast majority of people in this space are worried about. I've talked to a few publishers who, it's fascinating to me, they don't even track 30-day retention. They assume that everyone will be gone by then. Like, it's really interesting, and they certainly don't track 60-day retention. Whereas for us, one of the single most important metrics is, are they playing our game in a year from now? Which I'm pretty sure makes us different from the vast majority of mobile companies.
So let's shift a little bit, still stay sort of in this kind of business model discussion, and let's talk a little bit about where you guys start with a creative idea and how the interchange and sort of the trade-off between monetization, game mechanics, how that works into a finished product within your studio. I've heard of some cases, anecdotally, where business models have been been crammed in after the game is already really well established. Gabe Newell's come out really openly about how that's kind of the wrong way to do it, but he also advocated for getting the game together before then you start thinking about how you're going to monetize in game, which goes against what other people say, which is actually decide on a business model right at the beginning. If it's going to be free to play, establish that right up front, build your game around that model. So how do you guys address that question within your studio? Because I think you've each done it in a really tasteful and respectful way to the player, but they're all kind of different.
Yeah, I watched your session just the other day about mistakes you'll make moving in the free-to-play market, and we have made those mistakes. There's monetization now, more in-app purchase in Fruit Ninja, which isn't, that was essentially added to the existing game, which already engaged extremely well. And it helps to an extent, but and it's not bad. Again, it's in a sort of tasteful way, but it's not monetizing as well as you would expect a game like Fruit Ninja to monetize. Paid downloads, we're still obviously doing very well. Jetpack Joyride was engineered to be an entire ecosystem built around the coins and purchasing content. We have a new update that should hopefully add more content that's going to be coming. But Jetpack Joyride, yeah, that was built with that in mind. However, the monetization, I guess, wasn't as strong as some people. I mean, some in-app purchases now are way more expensive. At the time, we created like the counterfeit machine. You double your coins. And now we see that everywhere now. I don't know if we were the first people to do it, but that's an example of something that we were able to sort of pioneer that we were excited about because it was a creative approach. That's where the designers of the game made that. And we're working on some ad content for again there's no sort of escaping the way that the industry is trending, and there's going to be ads in games. And we're working on innovative, creative ways to try and do that. So for our future projects this year, we're really looking at it from as many angles as possible and massaging that business and monetization side into the core game itself so that it's fun. I mean, the reality is, is Fruit Ninja worth 99 cents for 3 years of constant content? Maybe it's worth more to some people. We just want to give those guys the ability to help, pay more because, they feel happy purchasing it.
So where did the idea for the coin doubler come from? Did it come from the game design team or the guys that were the creative people, or did it come from
straight up the game design team? You know, Luke Muscat and his guys. You know, we have our analytics teams, and you know, we're building that out more and more so that guys like Luke can be able to, you know, delve into that data and say, oh, well, you know, this is interesting. I'm going to create a innovative solution for this particular in-app purchase, and hopefully, you know, that's where we can be innovative in more than just, you know, the gameplay design itself.
And I think we, as sort of a group, can take risks, right? So in this instance especially, though this is changing a little bit, you can sort of throw things against the wall, right? You've got an enormous user base. You've got a high engagement game. You can try different techniques to see which works and which doesn't, right? And the immediacy of mobile allows you to get feedback and sort of, you know, make iterations in a really smart way, generally. Hopefully you don't piss off your user base in the process. But it's a very, very interesting tension. So we had a huge user base with games like Ninjump. We tried to retrofit them with in-app purchase. It just wasn't an elegant solution, admittedly. I think you do need to think about it from the get-go. What's a smart business model in tandem with what's a fun, well-designed game? But you can't let it influence that too much. At its core, it has to be a game that people love, people come back to. And so all we look at is, you know, one, is this fun? Is it testing well? When we put it out in a test market, we look at what the engagement is, what the follow-up, what the retention is, all of that first. And then we know we can tweak some of the monetization. But you can't let one influence the other too much. It still needs to be a good game.
And so when we started out, we had what was a little bit of a naive, or very naive, perspective. It was like, well, we'll just make a really fun game, and given enough time, we'll figure out how to monetize it, which is still, to be clear, that's the core of our company philosophy on a lot of things, and certainly is for monetization as well. But what we've realized over time is there's a little bit of nuance there. So now when we start off prototyping a game, the first and foremost question in our minds is simply, is it different? Is it fun? But beyond that, there's a few questions that we ask ourselves before we really dive in. So we say, is it going to have the kind of depth that will support real monetization and long-term retention? So in other words, like, even if we think we can make a really fun original game, if we think it will be a fairly shallow experience that you burn out on after a few days, we won't make that game. Because we're not going to be able to, at least we don't think we're going to be able to monetize that. Other people might be able to, but we don't think we can. So, you know, does it have depth? We've almost entirely stopped considering making single-player games. Because, again, you can absolutely, I mean, there are some really successful examples of free-to-play single-player games. We've found that in general, in our limited experience, it's a lot harder to make money off of someone who's just stuck in their own little box. Whereas when they're playing with someone else, that creates all kinds of interesting opportunities.
It validates their purchase even more.
Yes, exactly. And,
yeah,
and they can give gifts to each other, and they can just, I mean, there's so many things, so much richness that comes out of it's almost like saying the same thing, to be honest with you. The depth, multiplayer is a form of depth, right? Sure. So we've almost completely stopped making single-player games for that reason. And there's a fean other, I mean, I don't want to spend all the rest of our session talking about this, but the bottom line is we have these different criteria that we apply to the prototyping process. And once we're saying, oh yeah, this idea of ours does seem to meet all those checkboxes, like it's got the depth, it's multiplayer, you know, there's a few, another one that we think is very important is, can we come up right off the top of our heads with 4 or 5 different ways we would monetize this? Because we just assume that since we're doing unusual stuff, that like a lot of it will fail, right? Like, you know, if we can come up with 5 different ways to monetize this game, 3 or 4 of them won't work. But that's cool because one of them will. If we can only come up with 1 or 2.
It's a really exciting challenge, and we've had meetings at work about it, and we've said, like, you know, you shouldn't view this as a, you know, okay, let's look at what, you know, Supercell is doing or something and just copy their monetization model. Right. You know, like, and all the call goes back to that, you know, episode of Mad Men where Roger Sterling says to, you know, 99 cents, that's the greatest advertising ever invented. Somebody thought of that. You know, somebody thought of the fuel system or the energy system. You know, there's another innovative solution out there as well. Someone just hadn't thought of it yet. You know, can we do it?
I think that's a really, really important point because I think the days of looking at a successful title that you know, and then making that same title and launching it in market 6 months later and hoping to make meaningful revenue, I think that's gone.
Right.
I think and good for our industry and especially good for mobile is that this sort of forced innovation is what's going to be what differentiates. I mean, I think Clash of Clans is genuinely a fun game. It's got great PvP to it. I mean, I play the heck out of that game. I think Candy Crush is a really good game right now on the ultra casual side that's monetizing well. So none of those reinvented the wheel,
right.
but they did innovate a little bit and they did make really, really nice, fun games.
And I think that feedback loop, you know, this is an important thing that I hope is an overtone for this conversation, is that that feedback loop really is sort of a mode of empowerment for the gamers and for the audience to actually drive what you guys put into the games in the future. And I think like that's something that just hasn't happened before. You know, you used to work on a game for however amount period of time, and you'd put it out there, and you'd make all these assumptions about what the audience wanted, and then you just kind of cross your fingers.
And that's where we can talk about disruption, in the sense that somebody says to us, "Hey, why don't you try this?" You know, we walk up to the teams and say, "Hey, you know, try this." I don't know if that process works in a big publisher. Probably not. I'm not sure how many loops you'd have to sort of jump through, but we have that agility. Still, we have it today.
So let's talk, Julian, you mentioned risk a little bit, and I feel like we're sort of teetering on the edge here of this topic. So, you know, conventional wisdom is that, like, you know, indies can take more risks because there's less at stake. But then if you think about it, you think, well, the established players have these deep pockets, and so they can hedge their bets a little bit more effectively and actually like dabble in a bunch of different things without putting as much at risk. And so it's not clear to me still at this point in my career, you know, who is more sort of safe to take risks, but I do know one thing for sure is that you absolutely have to take risks if you want to be successful. I mean, that's like probably in a Zig Ziglar book somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. So why don't you guys talk briefly about sort of what role calculated risk playing takes in your process and in your strategy? Because obviously, you know, you have the situation, you all have hit games, you all have sort of this hit franchise thing happening, you know, and I think probably the tendency is to put a bunch of resources into that to keep that running and operate it as a service. Yeah. And then what do? Like, do you take somebody valuable off of that to do work on something new?
So Phil and I were talking about this a little bit separately. So, you know, when you have no mega hit making a ton of money, it's easy to take a lot of risks, right? So, you know, and I think we as smaller companies can continue to still do that. What I'm seeing is that smaller indies a little bit are taking a little bit less risk with sort of a hit like Jetpack or a hit like DragonVale, where I have a live team. I have to keep it going. It's, you know, it's keeping the lights on. It's allowing us to bet in different pockets, play in different genres, do a lot of those things. So we're doing that, but at the same time, I'm watching larger entities. I think EA's done a pretty good job of this, at making a lot of content free, trying to build a network out of that, cross-promoting through that network, saying, hey, we can risk some short-term revenue to make long-term gains. And I think that's very, very important to sort of think about. You know, early on, we said when we started our company in 2009, we said, let's focus on making great games first. Let's get those games into as many people's hands as we possibly can. And what we identified was a need for casual product. Games like Ninjump that you play in a 2-minute segment, you could just, you know, tap to jump, that sort of thing. We didn't make a ton of money other than cross-promoting to premium titles like Ragdoll or selling a little bit of advertising. It wasn't until we had millions and millions and millions of users whereby volume could sort of trump having to have a player spend $10 each. So having 5 million players a day spending, you know, 10 cents, or that's not a real number. So, but you know, having large volumes of people spend small amounts of money was really, really sort of turned the light bulb on for us.
Yeah, I mean, we have such a massive, you know, fan base to you know, utilize and experiment with, and that's
what. Do you know?
Sorry.
Oh, do you know?
Yes, we do. So, and that's, you know, it's like I'm looking at the thing. You know, unique downloads 500 million. I'm like, well, okay, but like, if you just keep getting into an arms race and say, well, you know, we want 5 billion now. And it's like, well, yeah, but all that's doing is adding another couple of zeros or whatever. So what we want to try and do is be more creative on all fronts and say, okay, well, let's take a risk with this particular title. And Julian's, you know, again, we talked about this, about, you know, do we want to make another title that does, you know, 500 million downloads? You know, that'd be nice. But what would be, you know, more exciting is if we were able to leverage a unique product, but monetize them in a higher way. So yeah, instead of getting 10 cents out of every 100 million people.
So that's taking a risk within an existing product. But what about new?
No. I'm talking about new products. So
okay.
So we're able to say, well, guess what? Maybe we can monetize really well with 100,000. And that's just something new and fresh and exciting that we'll learn from. Because if we get another 500 million, well, I guess we've learned that we can get another 500 million. It's all about that process and keeping up the pace with everybody. So.
We as a company may be a little bit too young to answer this question. I mean, we're only just now starting to have those kinds of conversations where it's like, wow, Christian is one of our lead engineers, great guy. Christian's been working on Tripletown for 2 years straight. This is a problem. Christian's a creative guy and he wants to do something else. But I haven't stressed about it too much because, partially because as a company, we're relatively good at building new things with really small teams, like I was mentioning before. Every prototype we've ever made, with the exception of one, started with just one engineer for an extended period of time and one designer working with him, part-time, or her part-time. So given that, it's actually really easy for us to say, hey, Christian's been working on Tripletown for 2 years. Let's just pull him off and let him screw around with this prototype idea that we have for 3 weeks. It's not going to kill Tripletown. Tripletown has enough engineers on it. And then Christian can do that and be happy. And that seems to be working reasonably well. But again, we're young, sure. So we'll see if it lasts. But that kind of philosophy has worked well for us. And I think in general, that's the thing you need in your DNA if you want to solve for this. Like if trying a new thing for you means putting 50 people on it, then you're never going to do it, right? You're always going to end up saying, well, gosh, that's too risky. Let's just keep feeding the beast that's keeping the company going. But if trying something new is one dude for 3 months, then no problem, right? And what's interesting in our company is that because we recruit people who are, obviously given our focus, we can't be hiring people who don't want to prototype. We have to be hiring people who want to experiment and try crazy things. And even though we're doing that all the time, it's still not enough for them. We'll have, for example, we have another engineer, Feder, who's great. Feder, despite the fact that he's gotten a chance to do plenty of prototyping, will occasionally be like, oh, I haven't done enough. I'm going to take some unpaid time and I'm going to go and I'm going to do Ludum Dare and crunch for 3 days on a prototype. And he gets to do more creative work than I would like to think the vast majority of engineers in this industry, and it's still not enough for him. So I think as long as we're encouraging of that and supportive of that, and at the same time, as long as we keep our philosophy of that's cool, but it's going to be just you, and you better be done in 3 months or 6 months or whatever, right? Sure. We're either going to decide it's fun or we're going to move you on to the next thing. I think we'll be okay.
Creative constraints always help, right?
Yeah.
So this is going to be the last question, but it's my favorite one. So I think that you guys are participating in the innovation of the new video game marketplace, of the way that consumers are actually having a voice in the way that the games evolve, in the way that they acquire the games, they play the games, and they pay for the games. Do you guys, and will you guys, innovate the way that game companies mature? We talked about this briefly before. Activision started when some Atari guys got sick of their deal, and they felt like they were getting a raw deal, and they were formed out of rebellion. And now, some people would say that Activision represents at least part of the establishment. Do you have an exit plan? Is there a milestone out there in the stratosphere that you watch and look for when you say, when we get there, then we're successful and we can be done? Or is this something that you're just going to go on forever doing, and just are you going to try to hold growth back? How are you going to evolve differently than all of the game companies that have come before you and become the sort of the established traditional publishers and game companies?
Well, that's a really easy question.
Yeah.
This is something Phil and Dave and I will talk about over beers at a blackjack table. Well, listen, as we grow as a company, we're facing real challenges, and you become more sympathetic to what you see going on with the larger companies. You really do. So I have a product team that generates a ton of revenue. I need to figure out how to take talent off that team, how to put it on, and I still need to figure out how to make all of these small bets concurrently. So are we rewriting a model? I don't know. Are we replicating one that took place 20 years ago, albeit on a different medium, right? On this, maybe. You know, I think, look, we see mobile it's early days still. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity out there. You can see the evolution of games. They're getting better. They're getting bigger. They're getting more immersive. You can sort of see where it's going. I think
you have to be thinking about the Ouya. You have to be thinking about smart TVs, right? Like,
absolutely. I mean, I want my product wherever it can be, right, over time. So what will my company become? At its core, we still need to continue just to make a great, fun product that people want to play and find the right distribution nodes, be it with local partners in China, Japan, Korea, be it on televisions, be it wherever we are. And a little bit, we're writing the script as we go, right? I think we have a vision for what we'd like to be, but I doubt anyone on this panel who answers truthfully will give you a meaningful 5-year plan. I think we know what's in front of us, what we need to do for the next 24 months, how we aim to do that, but the market's changing so rapidly.
Dream a little bit, like how about an ideal version of that story?
An ideal version of that story is we keep doing what we're doing for the next 50 years, and every single time the market changes, we're on top of it. And we're successful in every single stage of the way. Yeah. I don't know, Nintendo used to be a playing card company, so they've evolved. Maybe one day we'll manufacture cars, I don't know. Yeah. But what I know now is, as Julian was saying, we're passionate about making great games. That's what we want to do. If we weren't doing that right now, then no one would want to work there. And to say, yeah, we have a 5-year plan, sure, we've got a 5-year plan, but only within the realms of knowledge that we have now, So we continually evolve and update, and as long as we're passionate about the games we keep making, we're just going to keep doing that. We don't have like, oh yes, we're going to exit at this point.
But why not apply the same creativity that you put into your game development to your company's development?
So I think that's right. I mean, listen, I know I need to grow my network, right? Growing my network is the absolute most important thing. That's done by putting good product into people's hands without a big barrier. So it's mostly free product. Some of it will be ultra casual, some of it will be more immersive. I know that's what I need to do, and that will be my strategy. So how do I get more of my product into people's hands in the Asian market? How do I do it on different platforms? I mean, I absolutely know that's what I need to do, and that will be my focus. Make product the best I possibly can and push it out there. An innovative product without a barrier to entry will grow an immense network. And then with a network, you can do all kinds of things, right? If you've got 10, 20, 30 million users a day, you have a tremendous amount of freedom. So what I see in the market right now is there's a ton of really good game developers without meaningful distribution, right? And then there's a few players who have huge distribution. The games are okay. There's very few that combine the two. To the extent that I can combine the two is ultimately what I'd like to do.
I have 2 answers for your question. One of them, in terms of like investing creatively in the future of the company, we try to do that in part by finding unusual platforms that other people are not paying attention to, and be there first, or one of the people who's there first, in hopes that that platform explodes and that we benefit from having been there first. So for example, we were the first independent developer to make a game for the Kindle, not the Kindle Fire, the e-ink Kindle, the book reader. And that unfortunately did not actually work out for us. I mean, we made, actually the very first version of Tripletown came out there. A lot of people don't know that. Most people don't even know you can get games on that platform because unfortunately Amazon was not successful in making it a good place for games. But we went there precisely because we looked at it and we said, yeah, this is a little bit weird, but there's some of the fundamentals that you would want to see from a good games platform are there, and Amazon knows a heck of a lot about merchandising, so hopefully they'll be very good at surfacing our content to people. They didn't end up being, but that was the thought, and I think we had good reason to hope that. And so we're always looking for little opportunities like that, because oftentimes when you look at some of the companies that are most successful in our space, they were in the right place at the right time, right? They're also good companies, but they happen to be one of the first people making good games for iOS, just as iOS was exploding, and so on and so forth. So we want to be that. So we do look for those kinds of things, but we don't look 5 years out or 10 years out, because like these guys have said, the industry changes too fast. We're looking right now. Like, is there anything, an interesting opportunity right now that other people aren't paying attention attention to. Now, the other answer to your question, I'm going to apologize for in advance because it's a morbid answer. But when you talk about exits, like do we think about our exit? I never think about that because life is short and my exit could come tomorrow, right? Like I could have a heart attack and be gone. So no, seriously, right? So I don't, like Daniel and I both have a goal, and everyone I hope in our company shares this goal, which is we want to make games that make the world a better place. We want to make games that entertain people and that somehow improve people's lives, whether it's by helping them have better relationships with their friends or whatever, right? There's a bunch of different ways you could potentially do that. And that's pretty much what I'm doing day to day, because I don't know if I'm going to be around tomorrow. So yeah, if a wonderful exit happens 10 years from now, okay, fine, but for now, we don't even think twice about that. Our only question is, we have this game called Leap Day. How the hell do we make it fun enough that people want to play it? That's it.
It's already pretty fun.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's it. I really want to just give you guys my heartfelt thanks. Let's give one more round of applause for Julian Farrior, Phil Larsen, David Edery. Thanks to you for participating in this with us.